Before we begin the story of how a tiny guinea pig won the county fair, the magical true story of Buttons, I invite you to get comfortable. Let the world fade for a while. If you find yourself drawn into these quiet tales, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps more stories find their way to the firelight. Now, let's begin. In a hollow of hills, far from maps and motorways, the moon once watched something small prepare to change everything. The night air was thick with the hum of August crickets and the hush of 100 fairground tents sleeping in rows. Banners drooped. Popcorn machines stood like ancient sentries, the scent of sawdust and cinnamon curled over the grass like a lullaby. Somewhere, a tired windmill turned lazily in the dark. Behind the livestock pavilion, past rusted water troughs and forgotten prize ribbons, the old stable creaked softly. Its rafters held centuries of feathers, secrets, and hay dust. And in a corner stall with a crooked latch, there was a cage no bigger than a bread box, lined with hand-quilted fabric and laced with the scent of strawberries. Inside that cage, beneath the flicker of a single swinging lantern, a guinea pig blinked once. Then again. His ears twitched, as if catching something too quiet for human hearing. His name was Buttons, not for speed, certainly not for strength. He was round, like a tea cake, his fur a patchwork of caramel and cloud. Most days, he liked stillness. A corner nap, bit of lettuce, long looks toward nothing in particular. He was the kind of creature the world often overlooks. Soft, quiet, unspectacular, until he wasn't. Tonight, his little black eyes were wide open. He had never run a race. He'd never asked to wear a number, or to blink against the flashbulbs of a county fair crowd. He hadn't asked to be chosen. But something ancient stirred in his tiny chest, something beyond cages and carrots. Outside, the wind changed direction. Some say it was just a weather shift. Just one of those things. Others, the kind who remember snow patterns, who leave saucers of milk on the porch, who speak softly to crows, they believe it was something else. An old current waking up. A once-in-a-blue moon noticing a very small creature standing at the edge of something very big. Buttons padded once around the edge of his cage. He stopped, looked up through the wood-slatted ceiling at a crooked hole where dew slipped through. He wasn't dreaming. Somewhere not far, a girl tossed in her sleep, not knowing that by morning, her small silent friend would stir something not spoken of in years. This is not a story of champions. This is a story of the wind, and where it sometimes turns. Buttons loved corners. There was comfort in the angles, the way walls met and cradled his roundness. In his earliest days, he tucked himself into them. Corners of the cage, corners of couch cushions, the quiet nooks that smelled like linen and low light. That's where Ellie had found him, eyes half shut, when she opened that crinkly paper box on her 9th birthday. She didn't smile, not really. Not like her father had hoped she would. There was cake, yes. Balloons, half floating from expired helium. Her father had even tried to sing. But Ellie just stared at the little lump of fur. He blinked at her, and she looked away, setting the box on a chair with a politeness too old for 9. Her father cleared his throat. "Name him whatever you like." She shrugged. "Looks like a button." "Buttons it is," he said, hoping for a laugh. There wasn't one. Buttons didn't mind. He was used to soft starts. Used to not being asked. The days that followed were slow and summer thick. The kind of days that melt the edges off clocks and make everything, even the air, stretch and sprawl. Ellie didn't speak much. Not to people. Her words had folded inward, tucked behind drawings and long looks through windows. But every morning, she'd place a sliver of carrot in Button's dish. And every night, she'd lift a corner of his blanket to whisper, "Good night." The first squeak came one Wednesday afternoon. Not from him, he never squeaked, but from the hinges of her old metal pencil box as she rummaged for a crayon. She sat cross-legged by the window, sketching clouds she hadn't looked at directly. Buttons padded close in his cage, watching. His eyes didn't blink often. But when they did, it felt like punctuation. Like agreement. Her sketches changed. Grew braver, bolder. She started tracing things she didn't recognize but swore she remembered. Spiraled shapes like gusts or curled leaves. Tiny tracks next to larger ones. A blur that might have been wind or something walking with it. Buttons didn't judge. He only shifted slightly, resting nearer each day. One night, Ellie cried. Not storm tears, just slow ones, the kind that puddle more than fall. Her sketchbook stayed closed. Her sandwich stayed untouched. Her father watched from the hallway and didn't come in. But Buttons moved. He waddled across his bedding, pressed his tiny face between the bars with as much force as he could muster. When that didn't work, he repositioned. Tiny foot, nudge, squeeze. Then suddenly, plop, he was on the floor. Ellie didn't see him coming until he was crawling onto her lap, fur warm and silent. She didn't smile, not right away. But her hands, which had been fists, uncurled. She traced the cloud-white patch on his back with her pinky finger. "You're not normal," she whispered, the first words she'd said out loud in days. "You never have been." Buttons didn't squeak, didn't move. He just settled in. Ellie dreamed of white winds that night. She awoke with her hair mussed and cheeks damp, to find Buttons curled near her neck. The sun poured through the window in long, cathedral beams. She reached for a crayon. Neither of them spoke. They never needed to. And as the leaves on the backyard trees shimmered in the mid-morning light, a breeze, faint and citrus-sweet, rustled the pages of Ellie's sketchbook. Buttons, half asleep, lifted his head. Something unseen passed beneath the floorboards. A hush and then stillness. Not fear. Not surprise, just anticipation. The summer thickened like syrup. Days swelled with heat that climbed the porch rails and made the lemonade sweat before the glasses could. Crickets sang in shifts, and somewhere under the tomato vines, a spider built careful architecture while the world moved a little too fast above. Ellie did not move fast. Neither did Buttons. Each morning, she shuffled out in socks too big, her sketchbook tucked under one arm like a map. She'd let the back door sigh closed behind her, and then lower herself to the warm porch with the weight of someone older. There, she'd draw, not pictures, exactly, but memories she hadn't lived. Arches of wind, lines that pulsed like rivers. A tree with roots that tangled into stars. Buttons stayed nearby. His cage rested in the shade, under a rusted garden chair that hadn't held a person in years. But she always opened the gate. A little woolen ramp her dad had made led to the floorboards, and from there Buttons could wander, but rarely did. He preferred the edge of her shadow, the corner of her leg. The tiny hollow where her foot bent when she sat. At first, her father watched uncertainly from the kitchen. Coffee in hand, balancing hope on the edge of patience. Not pushing, not asking, just watching his girl slowly fill a silence that had gone too long without color. Some days she hummed, never full songs, just fragments, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than remembering. Bits of lullabies her mother might have known, or those half-melodies that dreams sometimes leave behind. It was then, always then, that Buttons looked up. His blinking slow, intent, like a reply in a language without words. One afternoon, Ellie spoke through the steam of grilled cheese and tomato soup. "He doesn't act like other guinea pigs," she said plainly, spoon circling in the bowl. Her father nodded cautiously. "How do you mean?" She shrugged. "He listens with his whole face." It wasn't a joke, so he didn't laugh, just nodded again. The lights hummed above them. The clock refused to hurry. That night, Ellie brought her sketchbook to bed. She turned the page before sleeping, setting a fresh one bare beneath the lamp. Buttons sat silent in his little loft, the soft smell of mint hay surrounding him. As the moon climbed, half shy behind the trees, Ellie whispered to no one in particular, "Do all animals carry stories?" Buttons didn't reply, but his ears twitched once. Then again. The breeze outside peeled gently at the corners of her window. Somewhere, an owl called, and a door hinge creaked miles away. Ellie dreamed deep that night. In the dream, she stood at the edge of a mirror-flat lake with skies turning orange at the edges. Behind her, something moved, quick and quiet, not toward trouble, but toward purpose. She never saw it, only the tracks it left. A half circle. A line, a single paw print in the shape of a star. And in her dream heart, a whisper, "Not all maps are drawn with ink." In the morning, her pillow was warm with the shape of small fur curled close. Her father passed the doorway just in time to see her reaching out a single finger, brushing the curve of Buttons back like sealing a promise neither had spoken aloud. He said nothing. The air was still. But something was beginning. The letter came home folded in half, the way school notices often were. Smudged at the crease, ink faded from riding around in the bottom of Ellie's backpack for at least a day longer than intended. She found it on the kitchen table, next to the chipped mug her father always used on Saturdays, the one that said, "World's okayest, Dad," in fading block letters. Her name was on it in careful print, Ellie Thorne. Room 3B. She opened it with the cautious fingers of someone used to surprises prefaced with, "Don't be upset." Local children's pet race, it read. Open to all animals. Furry, feathered, hoofed or webbed. Must be leashed or guided. No experience necessary. Her eyebrow lifted. Beneath the heading was a list of categories with loose guidelines. Dogs, ducks, ferrets, other, ribbons promised, treat pouches and handmade medals. Her lips twitched upward, just slightly. She turned around to find Buttons upside down in his fleece-lined tunnel, paws folded like a gentleman waiting on toast. "You?" she whispered, amused. "You wouldn't even run for kale." Buttons blinked, then blinked again. She tucked the paper into the fridge magnets. Probably the same way it would stay half forgotten until the day of the fair, unless her father noticed. He did. That night, he peered over her shoulder at the slip taped unevenly beneath the grocery list. "That for the fair?" he asked, half distracted by dishes. "Just something school sent." Ellie shrugged. He studied it. Children's pet race. A pause. Then, gentle, with a trace of hope he couldn't quite mask, he said, "Should I sign you up?" Ellie looked at Buttons. He was chewing a single sunflower seed with the contemplative precision of a chess master considering his next move. She snorted, a noise surprised out of her. He'd lose. Probably. Her father wiped his hands on a towel. But it'd be funny. Ellie couldn't argue. There was a kind of ridiculous charm to the thought of Buttons in a starter box, lining up next to exuberant labradoodles and squawking geese. He, who had never rushed anything in his life but a strawberry half. The next morning, the form was gone. A yellow sticky in its place, signed and sent smiley face. "Pack a snack for Buttons. Love, Dad." She rolled her eyes, but didn't stop the smile this time. By afternoon, the dust from the dirt path had turned golden. Her dad brought home 2 shoeboxes and a bag of carrots and declared it a training day. The racetrack they made was more suggestion than course. Sticks marking turns, rinsed yogurt lids as flags, and 1 pink jump rope serving as a finish line. Buttons sat at the starting line. Ellie crouched behind him, hands gentle on his fur. "Okay," she murmured. "Just once, okay?" He took 1 step forward. then another, then promptly sat. Her father grinned from the porch. Olympic material. Ellie rolled a pebble across the course. Buttons watched it, then yawned. An ambitious dragonfly did a lap overhead in a tenth the time. The sun shifted down, and twilight limped into the corners of the yard. "Maybe he doesn't need to race," her dad said as they carried the boxes back inside. Ellie didn't answer. She was watching Buttons, who was nudging the corner of the step like he was inventing his own quiet game. A slow circle. A pause. A line repeated just so. That night, as the shadows grew velvet thick and the moon rose egg yellow above the pines, Ellie lay in bed half awake. Crickets chirped in starlit rhythm. Buttons, nestled in the fleece blanket beside her bed, didn't stir until the wind changed. A single gust curled against the house. The curtains lifted, and with it, something in the very grain of the floorboards stirred. Buttons opened his eyes. Without a sound, he stood. Then, quietly, methodically, he began to run. Not far. Just small measured loops inside his pen. Nose pointed. Body curved. Each step soft and placed with a kind of memory not taught, but carried. He looked not like he was practicing, but remembering. The wind sighed again. Outside, the garden leaves rustled in agreement. Somewhere in the dark, the old weather vane creaked once and settled. Buttons ran one more circle. Then tucked himself into a tight spiral and went still, as if he'd never moved at all. Morning found the sky draped in petal-colored clouds, pale and slow-moving. Ellie woke late, not rushed, not sleepy, just somewhere in between, like a thought that hadn't fully formed. She noticed her sketchbook closed, its pencil resting diagonally across the cover like a bookmark. Buttons was already awake. He sat at the edge of his fleece ramp, paws folded delicately, eyes fixed not on Ellie, but toward the window. Toward the light, as though taking its measure. "Good morning," she mumbled, sitting up, rubbing one eye. Buttons didn't turn, just blinked once. Ellie tilted her head. "You okay?" He lowered himself slowly, but not into sleep. Into stillness. The kind you do when thinking something over the way grown-ups take their coffee outside to stare at nothing and everything. Later that day, she brought him out into the yard. Same makeshift track. Same pink rope finish line. This time, there was no ceremony, she simply set him down and watched. No quick commands. No coaxing him with lettuce. Just silence, interrupted only by the hum of bees drunk on rosemary blossoms. Buttons walked the edge of a yogurt lid, turned once, then plopped beside it. He began grooming one paw with the reverence of a monk folding laundry. Ellie crouched nearby, arms on knees, letting her sketchbook cradle her elbows. Instead of drawing, she watched the breeze comb his fur. "I know," she said quietly. "You don't feel like racing." Her father tapped on the window between chores, holding up a hopeful thumbs up with an exaggerated grin. Ellie shook her head, half amused, half weary. That night, dinner was warmed leftovers and watermelon slices that tasted mostly like water and just enough like memory. Her father grazed the surface of small talk over the table. "Have you figured out Buttons' secret weapon yet? Or is he saving it for race day?" Ellie smiled carefully, hiding it behind his naps. "Smart strategy." He winked. Lull him into a false sense of security. After dishes, Ellie lingered in the hallway, eavesdropping on the kitchen radio, whispering late-night stories from faraway call-in shows. Button was already curled into a polite comma in the corner of his cage. Still, she leaned in close. "You don't have to run," she murmured, barely louder than breath. "Nobody expects you to." But his ears twitched. The wind, outside the window, wasn't strong. Not enough to rattle anything. But it circled. That night, Ellie's dreams carried echoes, not images. Rhythms, almost. The steady drum of paws. Loops. Circles. A line crossing through them like a river splitting land. She woke with a start, breath calm but shallow. Buttons wasn't in his cage. Her heart skipped once, then steadied when she spotted him on the windowsill, forehead pressed gently to the glass, eyes reflecting the faintest glow from the garden's motion light. She didn't speak, just walked over quietly and scooped him into her arms. He didn't resist, just settled close, warm, heavy with whatever it was he'd seen, or sensed, out there. Ellie sat by the window with him in her lap, blanket wrapped around both. For a while, she watched the wind tease the branches and thought of everything that didn't move quickly but still arrived exactly when it needed to. The Thorne family farm wasn't large or fancy, the opposite, actually. Fencing leaned. The barn roof sagged like an old sigh. But it had roots that reached back generations, and a smell that never changed. Soil, leather, machine oil, and the faint sweetness of hay older than memory. Grandad Thorne still worked it in his way, early riser, slow mover, the kind of man who didn't talk about feelings or dreams but always left an extra biscuit just in case someone needed it. Ellie always said he looked like someone born in sepia tones. It was a Tuesday when she wandered over, Buttons snuggled in a flannel-lined basket. Morning light split crooked through barn slats, painting the dust motes like floating secrets. Chickens clucked in lazy rhythm. Somewhere near the rafters, a swallow darted into the light and vanished again. Grandad was mending a wheel, old cart propped up, tools in a row as neat as soldiers. He didn't look up when Ellie arrived, just said, "Mornin', flower," and nodded toward a stool. She sat, quiet. Buttons poked his nose out from the checkered cloth, whiskers testing the air like he was learning a story the breeze remembered. "What have you got him in a picnic basket for?" Grandad asked after a minute, not unkind. "He run away with the rolls?" Ellie smiled with a corner of her mouth. "He's gonna be in a race. At the fair." Grandad finally stopped winding the wire. He looked at her, then at the guinea pig. Then, slow and steady, he leaned forward, pushing his hat back on his forehead so the lines around his eyes caught the light. "That little thing?" he said, but not like he didn't believe it. More like he wanted to hear her say it again. Ellie nodded. "I told Dad it's just for fun, but Buttons, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like he's listening to things I can't hear." Grandad didn't answer at first. He stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, then walked slowly to a nearby shelf where oddities had lived for decades, spare locks, feathers, folded maps of places no one charted anymore. From between two dusty tobacco tins, he pulled something small. He placed it in Ellie's hand without ceremony. A tiny iron horseshoe, darker than soot and cool to the touch. Worn smooth at the edges. "Had a Shetland pony once," he said. "Mean as sin to the vet but gentler than rain when no one was lookin'. Wore this for 11 years. Swore it gave him sure footing, even in mud." Ellie turned it over in her palm. "Why are you giving it to me?" Grandad looked at Buttons, whose eyes met his in that long, deliberate way animals do when they know more than they tell. "Because sometimes," he said, "something walks quiet for so long you forget it could fly right past you if it had reason." He crouched, face close now to the basket's edge. "That little guy's got still eyes. Animals like that, they don't run early. But when they start, they don't stop till the story's done." Ellie clutched the tiny charm, heart unsure what it was climbing toward. "Why me?" she said, quieter than her question wanted to be. Grandad smiled, barely a shift of his weather-stitched face. "Maybe he found you first. Maybe you both needed corners until now." He tipped his cap in a way that meant conversation over. But before Ellie left, he leaned into the stall, gently patted the basket, and murmured something she didn't catch. When she peered inside, Buttons had spread his body along the bottom, still but not asleep. The charm lay beneath one paw. That night, Ellie tucked it beneath his bedding. Not for luck, not for tricks. Just in case certain stories needed old metal to anchor them. The wind lifted faintly outside the window. Inside, nothing moved. But somehow, everything started to settle into place. The fairgrounds woke slow, like a bear coming out of honey-thick dreams. Canvas tents stretched in the gold-rimmed dawn. Somewhere, a loudspeaker crackled to life with a crackling voice trying to sound awake. The scent of cinnamon sugar tangled with the crisp skirl of kettle corn, and children's laughter started blooming in small bursts near the balloon stand. Ellie stood at the edge of the midway, both hands curled around a woven basket heavy with hay and hush. Inside, Buttons rested like a prince disguised in fleece, his pink paw just touching the edge of the quilted lining. "You sure about this?" her father asked, watching the bustle as families filtered past, arms full of concessions and folded event pamphlets. Ellie nodded once. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't not smiling either. They walked slowly, past rows of painted pumpkins and butter churning contests, toward the livestock area where the children's race was setting up. The track wasn't much, just chalk lines on packed dirt, orange cones zigzagged like half-remembered geometry. Ellie settled on a patch of flattened grass. Buttons shifted in his basket but didn't emerge. He blinked once, then angled his nose toward the breeze. A girl with twin goats clattered past, their harness bells jingling like a careless song. A boy argued with his duck. Someone tried to feed their hedgehog a sprinkle cookie. Chaos hummed along the fence posts. "Okay," Ellie whispered, gently lifting the basket's cloth flap. The morning sun caught threads of Buttons' coat and turned them into soft gold. "You just need to walk, if you want," she said. "Or you can watch. It's okay." Buttons rose slowly, not sleepy, just deliberate. He placed one paw on the edge of the basket and looked out, not at Ellie, but at the track. He sniffed once, then sat like a stone statue, not frozen, rooted. The ribbon judge passed out numbered paper cards and safety pins. Ellie pinned one to the side of her dress and fastened a lighter copy to the harness loop her stitching teacher had helped her make. It wasn't really a harness, more a slow suggestion made of soft braid. Buttons didn't resist when she picked him up and placed him at the chalky starting line's edge. Children lined up on either side. Dogs sat quivering with anticipation. A proudly ribboned ferret wriggled in its owner's arms like static electricity. One girl had brought a cat large enough to be its own weather system. The announcer tapped the microphone twice. Everyone winced. "Welcome to the first ever county pet dash," he said, voice full of morning coffee and poorly hidden curiosity. "Racers, take your spots. On the count of 3? Buttons didn't look at Ellie. But his whiskers stiffened at the exact moment the wind shifted again. 1. 1,000 smells skated on the breeze: livestock, grass, warm sugar, something deeper. 2. Ellie took one breath, then let it go. She didn't crouch, didn't coax. Just rested her hand over her heart like she forgot where it was supposed to be. 3. It was more of a suggestion than a sound, half lost in the cheer from the crowd, the barking, the laughter, the excitement of animals doing exactly what they were or weren't meant to do. But Buttons didn't wait. He moved. Not in a hop, not in a scurry. He surged forward like his paws belonged to something older and wilder. Dust slithered beneath him, color blurred at the corners of his fur. He weaved before the dog beside him could bark, dipped beneath the flash of a racing duck wing, curved himself through each cone like he'd traced it in dreams. People shouted. Someone dropped a pretzel in disbelief. And Ellie, wordless, frozen, forgot to breathe. Buttons didn't look back. His ears flicked once, registering the wind. His body curved like poetry, low to the earth but somehow light, fluid. Spinning and darting like a stitch through a patient old quilt. The ribbon wasn't far. Neither, now, were the others. A collie barked just behind, agile and bounding forward with wild joy. The piglet actually squealed in time. The duck flapped once, determined. The ribbon fluttered. Buttons gave no extra effort. But the earth seemed to carry him, flicking a pebble just out of the way, curling a bit of breeze into his fur to lift it. Ellie braced herself, gripping the fence post, not to catch him, but to catch what this moment might become. And as the last itch of ribbon snapped across his shoulders, not torn, but conquered, the world stilled for a heartbeat thick with astonishment. Buttons didn't squeak, didn't skid. He just sat down, carefully, with paws folded as if to say, "That'll do." The fairgrounds held its breath. For a moment, just one, the world sat still. A sort of reverent hush fell across the pet track, crowd leaning forward as if afraid to blink. Then came the explosion of noise, kids shouting, parents gasping, a dog yipping jubilantly in third place. But Ellie didn't hear any of it. Her heart beat like it had been re-struck with some ancient rhythm. She stared at the small creature sitting calmly at the finish line as if he had wandered into a patch of clover and now had nowhere better to be. She wasn't the only quiet one. In the shadow of the popcorn cart, someone dropped a funnel cake. A judge, holding the stopwatch upside down, fumbled to remember how to speak. Even the girl with the goat twins looked momentarily uncertain whether livestock should be able to move like that. Buttons blinked once, slow. Ellie moved, not quickly, but as if called, drawn forward more by breath than by bones. Her tennis shoes made no noise over the trodden grass. When she reached him, he shifted slightly so her hands could find him easily. She scooped him up. Somewhere beside her, the collie barked in protest, more shock than jealousy, and licked its young handler to save face. Someone clapped. Then others joined. And suddenly the fairgrounds weren't hushed at all, but lifting together in a sound that tasted like disbelief and kettle corn and something older than cheer. The announcer cleared his throat. "Well now," he said, chuckling to cover his own astonishment. "It would seem that the winner of our inaugural dash is contestant number 23. Ellie Thorne, and her guinea pig." There was hearty applause, but it didn't feel loud. It felt oddly soft, odd, almost. Ellie hugged Buttons close, feeling the soft whir of breath in his chest. He hadn't broken a sweat. Guinea pigs do not, technically. But had they, he wouldn't have. A woman in a blue sash handed her a laminated certificate, the name already filled out in pencil-smudged print. "A real crowd pleaser," she murmured. "Never seen anything like that." Her eyebrows climbed. "Does he do tricks?" Ellie shook her head. "He does, different." The woman nodded, as though that settled things. Buttons shifted in her arms, nudging his small face toward the breeze that wound its way through tents and corn husks and laughter. Just listening. They passed a boy holding an iguana in a cowboy hat. He gave Ellie a thumbs up. "He smoked him," the kid said. "Your guinea pig is, like, illegal fast." Ellie smiled, just a little. "He's not mine," she said quietly. The boy frowned in confusion, but she had already walked on. Her father met her at the edge of the ring with 2 lemonades, though one had been mostly spilled in surprise. He handed her the fuller one. "That," he said, "was not what I expected." "Me neither," Ellie answered. Buttons nuzzled deeper into the crook of her elbow. "How'd it feel?" She looked at her father. His smile was lopsided, hopeful. She thought of cornered blankets. Of nights where breath ran deeper than dreams. Of movement that belongs more to memory than muscles. "Like something remembered me," she said after a while. Her father didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. The sun had started its downward lean by the time Buttons was offered a ribbon, the size of which nearly dwarfed him. Ellie tucked it into the side of the basket like a secret rather than a prize. It wasn't for showing off. Prizes never had been. They walked back across the fairgrounds slowly, as though crossing into something quieter, more personal. Someone called after them, something about photos, or the local paper, but Ellie just nodded politely and kept going. Buttons didn't turn his head, even when the goat twins bleated their approval. Back near the quilt pavilion, they settled into the shade of an unused exhibition table. Her father fetched corn dogs. Ellie removed the braided harness gently, careful not to wake whatever part of Buttons was still listening. He hadn't flinched during the race. Hadn't seemed surprised by anything. If anything, it was Ellie who looked like she'd just walked through thunder. The wind curled beneath the tablecloth, tossing scent and whispered sound like old notes passed in class. Somewhere behind the carousel, a brass band stumbled through a hymn half remembered from county weddings and Sunday radio. Ellie rested a hand on the edge of the basket. Buttons didn't sleep, but his eyes softened. "You've been hiding," she said quietly, not asking, just saying. His ear flicked once. She turned to her sketchbook, flipping past pages of spirals and wind-drawn symbols that filled her dreams but meant little in daylight. Today, she drew something clear, a straight line broken only once, by a small, comet-shaped blur. "You didn't just run," she murmured. "It was like, you belonged there. Like you remembered before I did." Buttons licked his paw. Nearby onlookers still lingered, some out of curiosity, others with that sharp-eyed wonder that doesn't quite believe what it saw. One boy asked if they were doing an encore. His mother tugged him away before Ellie could answer. "I think they think I trained you," she said, brushing crumbs from the blanket. "Maybe you trained me." Her father returned, holding 2 lemonades and wearing a face somewhere between proud and baffled. "So," he said, easing onto the folding bench beside her, "is this going to become a thing?" Ellie thought about it, thought about how Buttons hadn't run before, how she almost hadn't signed up, how nothing about today made logical sense. "No," she said. Her dad laughed gently. "Fair enough. I think this was a one-time thing," she added. Buttons blinked, once, deep and slow. Agreeing, or simply noting. "Sometimes," her father said after a long sip, "that's what makes it important. You don't repeat sunrises." Ellie nodded, not at him, but at the thought. Across the field, a patch of dusty air shimmered with the heat lifting off the tents. She watched the wind play between bleachers and popcorn carts and all the places too small for notice. Buttons turned toward it. His nose twitched, then stilled. And in that moment, barely longer than a breath, the laughter and voices hushed under the weight of something midday couldn't name. Just for a second, parents kept walking. Children threw beanbags. But someone, some few, paused. The old vendor with the hawthorn walking stick. The woman who ran the face painting booth with lavender tucked in her pockets. The girl with the twin goats sitting cross-legged now in the grass. They watched the white and caramel ball of fur sit at peace beside a girl who did not know what she'd begun. They didn't smile, not quite, but they nodded, and when they turned back to their lives, they walked a little slower. As though listening for something small. Something moving. Something real. Twilight didn't fall so much as it folded itself gently across the sky, like a blanket pulled over a long afternoon. The shadows on the fairground stretched out thinner than spun sugar, and the hum of excitement slowly unraveled into the background murmur of families packing up their prizes and memories. Ellie sat on the wooden steps near the edge of the show barn, a caramel apple untouched in her hand. Buttons was curled in the crook of her arm, his little paws tucked neatly beneath him, nose pressed lightly against the ribbon they'd been given. It fluttered faintly with each passing breeze. "They said we couldn't keep it," she whispered, more to the quiet than to him. "That it should go back in the judge's box for next year's display." But Dad asked politely, "So they let us." Buttons didn't move. She ran one finger along his back, reverently slow, like smoothing pages of a library book that knew more than it would ever say. "You weren't supposed to win," she said. "And somehow, I think you knew that, and didn't care." Across the way, someone was packing up the pie contest booth, stacking custards into brown boxes, laughing softly when a cherry tart refused to cooperate. A child squealed as his balloon twisted loose and floated upward toward the evening star. Ellie rocked gently, remembered how her arms had lifted without thinking, how her knees felt like they wobbled in time with the crowd's cheer. Remembered the strange hush, gentle and electric, that swept through everything the moment he crossed that line. Like the wind had paused just to watch. "You didn't pant," she murmured. "Didn't flinch. Didn't run like it cost you anything." She looked down. "You just knew." In the distance, another voice called, "Last round for lemonade," and the carousel slowed to a molasses crawl. Fairy lights blinked sleepily overhead, one going out for good just above the caramel stand. Ellie laid the ribbon flat beside her ankle, smoothing its creases. It gleamed faintly, soft blue, with gold lettering that had already started to smudge from her thumbprint. There was no trophy, no golden plaque, just the paper certificate in her bag. The whisper of something remarkable carried in bellies of clouds rolling in above the hills. She looked down at the creature tucked in the nest of her shirt. "You knew," she said again. "Not how to go fast. Not how to win. But, when." Buttons twitched once, not in notice, but in agreement. He didn't even flinch, her father had told the woman with the ticket stubs, wonder thick in his voice. It was like he heard something no one else could. She thought of that, of something old pulsing beneath the track, of tiny paws moving with grace not taught but inherited. "Maybe," she whispered, "you just came to remind us of something." The sky purred into purpling notes above them. Moths floated near the lamplight. A distant speaker crackled alive only to fade again, muffled beneath the tent where leftover raffle baskets waited for unclaimed names. Ellie gathered the blanket around Buttons. "You don't have to do it again," she told him. "Not ever." A breeze passed, soft but sure. She breathed it in. And as she stood, tucking ribbon, apple, blanket, and all into the crook of her elbow, the lights from the midway gleamed across her shoulders like the last reflection of magic that doesn't ask to stay. Somewhere, a fiddle scraped into song. Somewhere, a child begged to ride once more. She walked slowly home beneath a sky stitched with moving stars. And Buttons slept, weightless and certain, in her arms. That night, the fairgrounds rustled with the kind of quiet that doesn't stay still. The tents sighed as they settled deeper into their stakes. Strands of fairy lights blinked off one row at a time, like stars deciding which wishes to take seriously. Vendors packed their counters in half-light. The caramel stand swept up its last crumbs. The duck race guy counted his tokens. But amid the motions of winding down, a different kind of movement began to ripple through pockets of conversation. "Did you see that guinea pig? Little thing with the white patch? No way it ran like that. They must have trained it for weeks. Probably motorized, I bet. Had wheels under the fur. But none of the guesses stuck. They floated, bounced, got tangled in hot dog steam and tugged away by the wind." By the corndog cart, the old man who carved nameplates nodded slowly. "Not a trick," he said into the collar of his coat. "Nothing hidden under that fur but thread and heartbeat." The fortune teller down by the kissing booth ruins lit a lavender stick and muttered, "I told you." Some of 'em remember. some just wait. A group of teens rolled past on their bikes, razzing each other about how the pig had outrun a golden retriever. He's gotta be jacked up on sugar pellets. No way a guinea pig moves like that. You saw him, though. None of them answered that. Under the tilted awning near the beekeeper's judging tent, Mrs. Glass, the art teacher who wore earrings shaped like moons, sat scribbling in her composition notebook. She drew a curved shape tucked between two motion lines. No caption, just the shape, again and again. A young kid named Oliver, who'd brought a turtle named Pickles to the race, leaned over quietly. I think it was magic. Mrs. Glass didn't look up. Just nodded, barely. We practiced all summer, Oliver added. Pickles can move when he wants to. But it didn't feel like speed today. It felt like he was already there. At the edge of the livestock pen, the boy with the goose sat cross-legged, sharing popcorn with his downy friend. He spoke aloud, more to the feathers beside him than to the air. He didn't really try. He looked like he just followed a thread we couldn't see. A woman sweeping near the main gate overheard and paused. "Threads don't show up for everyone," she said softly. "Only to those who need reminding." The boy thought about that. The goose flapped once, then nestled down. A judge, still wearing his official green volunteer vest, wandered back to the racetrack with the stopwatch in its pouch. He knelt down and ran a weathered thumb over the last chalk line, now smudged into dusk. Not much left to prove what happened. Bits of cone rubber, a few sets of tracks, and an odd hush still clinging to the corners like fog nobody announced. He looked up, spotted Mrs. Glass, still drawing under the awning light. Didn't mark his time, he said, half to himself, half to the shadows. Didn't even need to. Back beneath the grandstand, someone unzipped a sleeping bag and whispered, "They say it's the quiet ones. The ones that hold still until the world lines up." A caramel apple stick clattered to the ground not far off. At the edge of the parking lot, two fair workers loading hay bales into a pickup watched something rustle across the grass. "You see that? Probably a cat. Too round. Too quick." They stood in silence a moment longer, then got back to stacking. The wind rolled in, soft and curious. A rustle near the racing cones. A flap of tarp left loose. And across the fairgrounds, in lean-tos and booths and midway carts, those who had watched closely spoke very little. But some placed an extra offering beside their door, a crust of sandwich. A blueberry, a ribbon folded neatly on a folded square of cloth. Just in case, because days pass, and memories shift, but not all stories fade with the confetti. Some stay, especially the ones that don't quite fit. Especially the ones whispered under breath, years later, when someone says, "Hey, weren't you there the year a guinea pig beat gravity?" I swear I saw it. Still don't know if we imagined the whole thing. Yeah, but what if it imagined us first? The letter came in a plain envelope, no stamp, just soft cursive across the front, Ellie Thorne. It waited quietly among coupons and grocery flyers, tucked half under the toaster, its corner slightly bent as if too shy to knock. Her father found it first but didn't open it, just set it on her nightstand with the same care he gave to Sunday pancakes and busted shoelaces. Ellie noticed it after dinner. The fair had come and gone. The ribbon hung from her bookshelf like it had always belonged there, draped beside a feather she found once in winter and hadn't been able to throw away. Buttons was asleep, or at least still, his body a warm comma next to her lamp, the light pooling just at the edge of his fur. She studied the handwriting, then opened the letter without hurrying. "Ellie, I don't know if you'd want to hear from me. Or if you'd still remember how I sign my name or write my E's too round. I don't expect a reply. But I had to write. Something's been coming to me in dreams. Not every night, but enough. A small shape. white at the edges, moves just out of view. I thought it was a bird at first. A pup. But when I woke the third time, the name came to me, soft as summer grass. Buttons. Is he real? Was he ever? The dreams never feel sad. Just full. Like remembering something from another life I didn't get to finish. I hope you're well. Truly. Tell him hello, if he's still with you. Love, if I may, Mom. Ellie didn't move. Just let the paper rest in her lap as the dusk gathered thick at the corners of the room. For a minute, the only sound was the ticking clock, the one someone had long ago tried to fix, and failed. It ticked in uneven beats, like a heart recovering. She looked at Buttons. He was awake now, eyes open, not alarmed, just watching. I don't dream about her, Ellie whispered. Not really, but sometimes. I think I remember the way her coat smelled in March. Buttons blinked, once. Then again. The light caught the edge of his whiskers like threads in lamplight. She dreamed of you, Ellie said, folding the letter with care. That matters, right? No answer. Just the quiet settling between them. Outside, leaves shivered against the windows. A low creak came from somewhere deep in the house, pipes or memory, hard to say. Ellie rose and crossed to her dresser. From the top drawer, she took a small envelope of pressed petals and a tiny photograph curled at the corners. A woman with laughter in her squint, holding a baby with hair like dusk. One by one, she added them to the letter. Not to send it, just to keep it company. Later, when the dark wrapped gentle around the house, she placed the letter beneath Button's blanket. Not because he could read it, but in case he was the only one who knew how to carry things that far without breaking. That night, she dreamed of wind. Rolling not like a storm, but like a tide reaching for shore. Something moved at its edge, small, certain. Turning toward home. And in the morning, the sun rose sweet and slow, like it, too, remembered something worth waiting for. Time passed, the way it does when no one's measuring. Leaves turned, fell, and made way for more. The ribbon faded from blue to sky-washed, then to memory. Ellie grew inches taller, her voice shifted in quiet degrees, and her shoes no longer made that careful scuffing sound when she walked across the porch. Buttons didn't change much. He still slept in corners. Still blinked like he knew what came next. But his movements slowed, only slightly at first. Then more. Each August, Ellie would place the pink jump rope across the backyard as a finish line. Not because she expected anything, but because rituals hold shape even when reasons blur. Buttons would watch. And then, one gentle afternoon as cicadas whispered their dry lullabies, he walked it. Not raced, just walked. A single pass. From shade to shadow, pause light and even. She didn't cheer. Didn't ask for more. Just rested her hand near where he'd finish and whispered, "Still got it." He blinked at her like she'd told him something he already knew. That year, Ellie started high school. Her sketchbook got traded for notebooks with too many grids. But tucked inside the flap of her binder was a drawing from years before, a spiral traced by a single paw. She never explained it to anyone. Buttons adjusted to the quiet. His steps more deliberate, his appetite delicate. He stopped climbing the ramp on cool mornings. Began to wait for her touch before moving. As though the warmth of her palm sparked something he'd stored away during the louder chapters. One winter, Ellie fell ill, fevered and achy, lost in blankets and cough drops and sleep that felt like sinking underwater. Every time she stirred, Buttons was there. Just beside the bed. Not loud, not restless, simply present. Her father said it was strange, the way Buttons refused food unless Ellie was awake. Loyal little lump, he joked. But when he brought warm hay or special greens, Buttons would only sniff, then turn his head toward the bedroom. When Ellie mended, slow and pale and star-eyed, her first movement was to reach toward the cage. He met her halfway. That spring, he began to make a sound, soft and rhythmic in sleep, like a purr marbled with breath. Ellie would close her eyes beside the cage and match it, heartbeat to heartbeat, until both were still. She didn't call him old, not aloud. That felt wrong. He wasn't old. He was worn in, weathered like legend, like rivers, like lullabies. Buttons still had his watchfulness. He still woke when she cried, though she did it more quietly now, in the kind of silence people mistake for strength. One evening, as sunset stitched itself into everything, her father took a picture, just Ellie on the porch stairs with Buttons in her lap. No posing, just light and quiet and years. He had the photo printed. It lived in the fridge frame beside a drawing from second grade whose colors had long since faded. When friends came over and asked about the guinea pig that won a race, Ellie never said much. Just pointed toward the cage where Buttons lounged like a retired dancer. Sometimes that was enough. Fewer people remembered the fair now. But Ellie remembered. And when she whispered, "Do you want to walk the line this year?" he would lift his head slightly. Consider. And sometimes, only sometimes, take one small loop across the porch. Not chasing, not proving, just remembering. The morning unfolded gray, like paper left under rain. Light came late and unwilling. Clouds pushed low across the hills, slow and soft, like someone trying not to wake the house. Ellie noticed it first when she set down his dish. A few curls of parsley, one sliver of apple, all untouched. She didn't panic, just watched. "Not in the mood?" she asked softly. Buttons didn't answer. He sat in his usual spot, tucked in, but not curled. Eyes half-lidded, breathing quiet enough to miss if you didn't know how to look. Ellie stepped closer, rested a finger on the top of his head. He leaned into it, but with the weight of something loosening, not holding on. Her heart gave one soundless beat against her ribs. Not alarm, but recognition, like when a storm passes and the birds fall silent. She wrapped him in the soft blue cloth he always burrowed into when it snowed. Scooped him into her arms as though filling them with breath. Neither of them spoke. Out on the porch the air was still. Clouds moved in waves above the trees, low enough to graze. The wind was warm, though nothing had changed the season. Ellie sat on the steps and held him against her chest. His fur was warm, but in a different way, like it remembered heat instead of making it. "You don't have to stay," she whispered, more to the moment than the creature. Buttons shifted just slightly. Not to escape, not to nest. Just enough to press the edge of his face against her collarbone. Like a bookmark closing the chapter. She closed her eyes, let her cheek rest against the top of his head. And they sat like that a long time, not moving, not waiting. Just being. The breeze stirred once. It smelled like garden dirt and worn wood and old sunlight trapped in quilts. Then, quiet as breath leaving a room, Buttons stilled. His last exhale was so soft it might have been the wind itself. Ellie knew. She didn't speak, didn't cry right away, only rocked slightly, the way she had when she was small and storms made the windows shiver. "I saw," she whispered. The clouds parted almost imperceptibly above the far field, shadows shifting shape across the grass. She traced a single line along the bridge of his back. Smooth fur over stillness. "You did it," she said at last. The wind moved again. Not loud, not swift, but just enough to lift a corner of sky and carry it somewhere else. Behind her, the house didn't creak. The world didn't pause. But Ellie felt it, felt something untangle, like when laces finally go slack after too many knots. She rose slowly, bundled his weight with the softness he had loved. She didn't rush. She walked to the backyard. No cones left. No jump rope. But she laid him there, just for a minute, where the path used to start. The grass caught the light. A single bird called from the fence. Just once more, she whispered. As if, in some thread not yet cut, he might still remember the line. Then she gathered him, stepped into the turning wind, and didn't look back. Kids still talk about it. Not in every classroom or at every rodeo. Not loudly. But sometimes, between snow angels and snack time, between bus rides and chalkboard erasers, someone says, "Did you ever hear about the guinea pig who ran faster than a goose? Or a dog? Or time?" They giggle, whisper, wonder. They say he didn't even need a leash. That he didn't train. That he just stood up one morning and decided. Some teachers smile and shake their heads. A few lean forward and whisper, "My brother was there. He says it's true." Sometimes they show a photo. A blurry snapshot where the subject isn't visible at all. Just a dust swirl at the finish line and a girl blinking like she's trying to remember her own name. And every August, right before school starts, the county fair sets up again. There's a pet race, but it's not the same. Children bring terriers wearing tutus. Rabbits with stickers on their harnesses. An elderly iguana once took second place, because he blinked at the ribbon table with perfect timing. But no one moves like Buttons did. They don't word it quite that way, not out loud. But a hush comes over the race checkpoint when someone wonders, is she still around? The girl from that year? No one answers directly. The announcement board, propped beside the start line, has a small sketch tucked behind the tacks. It's not official, just a hand-drawn image left anonymously sometime years ago. A guinea pig with careful eyes, gazing past the page, outlined in the soft blur of running wind. No one removes it. It's laminated now, just in case. Vendors mention her sometimes. "I think she worked at the lemonade stand one year," says a woman folding funnel cake batter. Didn't say a word, just smiled with her eyes. An older man at the nail driving booth nods when asked. Ellie Thorne. Real name. Used to bring a sketchbook and sit near the goat pens, listening. People don't say Button's name first. They let it hang, wait to see if someone else remembers. But they do remember. You can tell by the way they leave odd little things along the back path behind the barn. A slice of apple shaped like a heart. A sunflower seed arranged neatly in a circle. One child once set down a thumb-sized quilt square with blue thread stitched through the middle. Some things grow larger than believed. Tales fold into each other. A story like that, quiet and strange and steady, doesn't vanish when the last fair tent is packed. It goes home with people. Sits in their back pockets. Whispers to them on slow days. The girl, they say, moved away. Or stayed. Or maybe both, depending on the telling. But the hush is always the same after someone speaks of her. The kind of hush where you're listening not for footsteps, but for something smaller, a breath against grass, or a soft rustle that doesn't belong to wind. Some say they've seen it years later. A white flicker on the edge of the track. A blur between two cones. A shape that doesn't quite hold under sunlight. You can't call it proof. But every now and then, when a kid lines up at that starting chalk, just before the whistle, they'll look out across the dirt and smile. As if someone else is smiling back. Wind moved like memory through the tall grass. It didn't shout, didn't rush, just wandered, soft-footed, close-lipped, brushing gently against cornstalks still standing from harvest, rattling paper soft leaves like secrets being turned in sleep. The fairgrounds were empty now. Tents taken down, ribbons packed away in flat-lidded boxes. Only the chalk lines remained, faint and scattered, like ghosts who didn't realize the dance was done. Behind the pet barn, the pasture sloped into a lazy hill. Children never played there. It wasn't forbidden, exactly, just never invited laughter. Still air, leaning fence posts, grass that grew a little taller than expected, even when trimmed. That was where the last quiet thing lived. No markers, no stone, just a small patch of earth where a hand-stitched corner of cloth sometimes fluttered like a forgotten flag. People didn't visit in groups. Sometimes a girl came, a little older now, taller in bone, steadier in shoe. Always quiet, same way. She didn't bring flowers, or carrots, or poems scribbled on leaf margins. She just came. Sometimes she sat, sometimes she stood, sometimes she just walked the weathered edge of the track once, fingers brushing the air where a ribbon once snapped like a whisper across tiny shoulders. Sometimes she placed her hand flat over the grass, like pressing a doorbell in a dream. There were stories, of course. Market vendors who swore they'd seen a flicker dart beneath the lemongrass stall one twilight. Teens with camera phones that captured nothing but blurred brightness skimming ankle high. A janitor once left a stall open after dusk, not by mistake, he insisted, but out of courtesy. Found it empty. Found it still. No mess. Just a single dandelion folded stem first on the feed tray. Ellie didn't argue, didn't explain. When asked if it was true, if she remembered the race, remembered the guinea pig, remembered what the wind felt like that day, she sometimes smiled. Not always, but when she did, it never reached her mouth. Only her eyes, only the places people don't look directly. One year, a child wandered off from the funnel cake line. Young, toddling, more curiosity than coordination, was found a few minutes later, mud on his shoes, wide eyes blinking toward the hillside. He pointed to the long grass and said, "White mouse laughed at me." His mother hushed him, chuckled. "Your imagination, baby." But the child shook his head. "No," he said. It laughed small and real. There were no tracks, only a ribbon of grass curled wrong, still bent against the direction of the breeze. The old fortune teller still set up her tent every August. Didn't advertise much anymore, but if asked directly, at the right hour, with coins already placed warm in her palm, she'd say softly, "Some animals leave twice. Once their body goes, then again, much later, when the story does." She held a jar on her shelf. Inside, one piece of torn cloth, a circling of hair, and a seed. "Still waiting," she'd whisper. But not for him. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the fairground lights flickered on after a long stillness, wind would run where no one walked. Fast, low, not afraid, as if it, too, remembered. The seasons softened around her. Not with fanfare, not with milestone, just the quiet way time folds its edges, tucks itself into corners already well used. Ellie grew older in the manner of trees, more rings beneath the bark, but steady in her stillness. She no longer traced spells into the air with sketchbook pages. Homework came in typed packets, rules in longer forms. But sometimes, in the pause before sleep, her hand would drift back toward the nightstand corner, where buttons once lived, and rest there. Just for a moment, just to remember. She went to the fair only once after that, the first August without him. Walked the grounds slowly, bought a lemonade she didn't finish. Sat near the livestock pavilion, not on the benches, but in the grass behind. The part with shadows, where the sun never fully pushed. Kids raced again that year. One boy brought a chicken that sprinted in confused zigzags. A girl's turtle made it halfway before deciding shade mattered more than prizes. Parents clapped politely. Pet fur clung to hopeful shirts. Ellie didn't enter, didn't speak. But when the final bell rang, and the last cone was knocked slightly askew by a beagle's tail, she rose. Walked to the track, knelt gently where the chalk line should have been. closed her eyes, just long enough to listen. A judge glanced her way. Started to speak. Stopped. There was nothing official to say. She left without souvenirs. Carried only the smell of kettle corn and soft dust home with her. That fall, she cleared her bookshelf. Not all at once, just a little at a time. Some books donated, others boxed. But one thing remained. A hand-sewn corner of cloth folded into a square, held down by a smooth iron horseshoe too small for any modern-day use. Once, while dusting it, her father paused. "You sure you want to keep that?" She looked at him, brow tilted like time never quite unlearned how to crease. Yes. No explanation. None needed. Winter passed gently. Snow arrived like a secret told just loud enough for rooftops to hear. Ellie walked slow when it came, never rushing, always watching the way wind shaped drifts as if remembering paths the eye forgot. She murmured things sometimes, not to people, but to the in-between places. The space before dawn, the hush inside cupboards, the air a moment before the phone rings. It wasn't grief, not anymore. It was echo, soft, honest, ongoing. On the spring day she turned 17, she took a walk before breakfast. Past the porch, the garden, let her hand brush the fence post twice. At the back of the property, she sat in the grass with her shoes off and her fingers loose in the dirt. "I haven't forgotten," she said aloud. The words didn't echo, but a breeze answered, small and warm and curving forward. She smiled, not big, but true, then reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a sunflower seed, and placed it gently on the earth. Waited a moment, then rose, and walked back without looking over her shoulder, the way you do when you trust something enough to stay exactly where it belongs. The third Thursday of October arrived quiet and curled, as if the month had decided, just this once, to whisper instead of brag. Ellie sat on the porch in wool socks, the ones that always slipped past her heels, holding a chipped mug that smelled more like cinnamon than heat. She was supposed to be packing. College brochures and application essays waited inside like patient nags, spread across her bed in a fan of futures she hadn't named yet. But the porch felt kinder. Smoother around the edges, less insistent. The fields bowed at the waist with morning mist. Trees clicked their last leaves together like wind chimes remembering a tune they only played once. Near her knee, a patch of worn fleece lay folded. Just fabric now, but still, her hand found it. It had holes. One corner faded from too many washings. It didn't matter. She ran her thumb over the seam. Down the steps and into the yard, the grass bent to itself. She imagined him there, buttons of eyes bright with knowing, but blinked before her heart could rewind too far. She knew memory's weight. You had to lift it carefully or it crumbled. Inside, her dad called something about eggs. She answered halfway, then stayed where she was. By the garden, a single dandelion had bloomed despite the season. Bold, off-script, a little miracle with soft fists. Ellie stared at it, smiled, small. "Wrong time," she murmured. But it didn't argue. From behind the shed, a magpie lifted into a curl of breeze. She followed the bird's tilt across the sky until it disappeared against pale clouds. In the stillness afterward, a hum remained. Not wind, not quite. More like the vibration between two pages of a book that hasn't been opened in years. She knew that hum, had heard it once beneath her bed when she was sick. Once in the barn loft where Granddad used to whistle tunes no one else knew. Once, clearest of all, when a small creature startled the air by remembering how to move with impossible precision. Ellie closed her eyes, and there it was again. Pawprints she couldn't see on soil she hadn't touched in years. Soft, fast, certain. She reached into her flannel pocket for the latest letter, laminated edges curling now from rereadings. Her mother's words had dulled with time, but not meaning. "I think of a small white shape sometimes," it had said. "Fast, but gentle. It never speaks, just lingers." Ellie folded it back into place. Whispered, "That was him, you know." Nobody answered, but a crow called twice from the woods. She laughed. Not loud, not bitter, just enough. "You don't have to visit," she said, turning toward the field. "But thank you for staying the way the wind does. Not always around, but never gone." Beneath the porch rail, a leaf skated in place, spinning slowly, without touching down. Ellie pressed the fleece to her chest, rose, and stepped back inside to write an essay about memory, not because the prompt asked, but because stories need air the same way lungs do. Behind her, the wind circled once, brushed the porch, and moved on. The rain came as mist first. Just a breath on the windows, a hush so thin it barely changed the light. Trees leaned closer, listening. And inside the old house, Ellie moved quietly, the way people do when every sound feels too large. She had been sorting papers, applications in one pile, rejection letters in a drawer, blank pages where dreams had yet to unfurl. But none of that mattered now. Not really, because tucked between two forms, each folded with hope, was a piece of drawing paper she hadn't seen in years. It held no name, no caption, just a curve, a line drawn with the memory of movement rather than the study of form. And beside it, the faint outline of a pawprint. She sat down on the floor, letting the page rest across her knees. It was faded, bent, smelled faintly like hay and pencil shavings. But her fingertips trembled when they traced it, like finding a door that still remembered the shape of your key. Down the hall, the clock ticked too loudly. She flipped the page over. No message, no mark, just the quiet of something once carried. The house was still. Her breath slowed without trying. She thought, "I should let go." Then thought, "What if he doesn't want me to?" Not because he refused to rest, but because he knew she hadn't finished listening yet. That night, the dream didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, flashes of wind, a gold-toothed moon, a fabric square drifting through orchard air. Then, without sound, Buttons. Not younger, not older, just there, standing still, as if he had always been waiting somewhere she'd forgotten how to look. She didn't speak. She knelt in the grass, reached out her hand, not with command, but invitation. Buttons stepped forward, licked the center of her palm once, then turned, and bolted, not away, but ahead, toward something brighter than light, softer than memory. Ellie followed, barefoot. The terrain never shifted, but she knew they were moving. She could feel it in the ache behind her ribs, in the rush building just beneath her jaw. They crossed nothing, and everything. Then, suddenly, he stopped. Right before a line made not of chalk, but breath. She caught up, fell to her knees in the impossibility of it. Paw by paw, Buttons stepped across. And vanished. No noise, no fanfare, just gone. Ellie stayed kneeling, hand hovering over the invisible tape of the world. Then she heard it, distant. One deep echo of laughter. Not childish, not human, just small, and real. She woke with her cheek against the carpet, the drawing still beneath her. Rain tapped the windows, soft but present. Somewhere, a kettle whistled low. Ellie rose, returned the sketch to her folder, not to forget, but to hold. Then stepped into the morning with damp sleeves, steady breath, and the kind of pause that lets the wind pass through, but not without first stopping to say hello. Spring didn't announce itself so much as exhale, breathing warm mist onto window panes and unrolling green where frost had folded in. The days stretched longer, less out of ambition than curiosity. Ellie found herself waking before her alarm, not with urgency, but with the kind of hush that follows dreams you can't quite hold. She moved slower now, not because of weariness, but because she had learned that meaning waits in the pauses. One afternoon, when the clouds were the color of rinsed wool and the breeze had the scent of wet dandelions, she visited the drawer she hadn't opened in months. It stuck, as it always did. But she coaxed it loose, like persuading an old friend to speak one more time. Inside, a ribbon once blue. A drawing curled gently at the corners. A folded note with faint creases, still holding words written in a mother's rounded hand. Underneath them all, a tiny charm. The horseshoe, worn smooth by time, blinked dully in the filtered light. Ellie held it between thumb and forefinger. Not as a relic, not as grief, just as, this, a thing that had been touched by story. She stood, stepped outside. The path behind the barn had grown faint with disuse, but her feet found it easily. Past the sun-warmed fence posts. Past the place where Rosemary now stood taller than her knees. Past every echo that didn't need speaking. At the end, where the tall grass bent in a patient circle, she knelt. Pressed the charm into the soil, not hidden, not obvious, just placed. Offered. "Thank you," she said. No punctuation, no audience, just breath and earth. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, but something in her chest unlocked like a window left cracked for seasons change. In the wind that followed, just one sigh long, there was a noise. Not a squeak, not a word, just the tiniest thread of sound curling around her ankle like a ribbon on its final graceful loop. She stood, waited, then nodded once, to the space between wild clover and air. "Okay," she whispered, then turned, walked back up the path, slow and steady. A trail behind her in the dew. Not her own, just 5 small prints where nothing else had touched.